Hello, welcome to the continuation of the Goffstown Budget Committee meeting. We just had a facility tour of Goffstown High School. In the future, we'll be announcing where we'll be touring, and the public is certainly welcome to attend those tours as well. So we're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
And the flag is like
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so now we're going to go through the call of the roll. So I'm going to have Richard Fletcher. Can you start us off?
Richard Fletcher from Village Water President.
Allison DeCesare.
Jim Craig, Select Board.
Olivia Welch-Erdahl.
Laura Stevens.
Frank Hobbs, Vice Chair.
Joe Alexander, Chairman.
Samantha Kearns, CIP Representative.
Melanie Renfrew-Hebert.
Doug Pounds.
Okay, and we're also joined by Danielle from the town and Scott from the school as well. So I mainly wanted, so we already had an hour of this meeting, so I'm hoping this will be real quick, but I first want to go through the approval of the minutes from the last meeting on June 20th, 2023. I don't know if there are no paper copies here, but has everybody had the opportunity to review those minutes? Okay, seeing no questions or comments, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from June 20th.
Okay, Melanie Renfrew-Hebert makes a motion to approve minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Frank Hobbs. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, we're unanimous. Okay, next on the agenda, new business. So I want to take the opportunity, again, we had this at the last meeting, these are recent budget reports. So I don't want to take time to look through all of these, but if the committee would like to look through these, maybe on their own time, if they have any questions, the correct procedure is to go through Catherine, and we will get an answer to you about that specific, and if we believe that the committee should know about it as a whole, we'll also let you know if that's if the question warrants the committee needing the answer. Is there any comments about the budget reports? Okay, great. So the meat of the meeting is going to be the budget cycle calendar. So everyone has this calendar in front of them. We should have, I just wanted to go through and discuss it with the committee. The one thing I wanted to discuss was September 2023, and then I'll take comments from others. I found it more fruitful myself. We had an hour-long tour of Goffstown High School. There is an option, if we choose to take it, to have a couple Thursday tours as well. So that would give us more time at the facilities. So I want to ask the committee as a whole how they feel about that. And then if we decide that this is the right call, I'll have Danielle start setting up and Scott start setting up tours for Thursdays as well. But I want to see how the committee feels. Melanie.
Thursday tours seem like a good option. I think we had mentioned maybe weekend tours, which I thought might have been a bit more burdensome for the schools. So the idea of Thursday tours, Mr. Chair, seemed like a great idea to me.
So I will say Bartlett and Maple Ave, I think we can knock out in about an hour or so. Glen Lake and Mountain View, similar, hour and a half. But I'm looking at the town, and I think that, between transportation to different areas, it might be, we should do maybe one facility and then on a Thursday do another facility. So I'm going to go, Sam, go ahead.
The only Thursday that I would be opposed to would be the 14th, because that is the CIP presentation at Town Hall.
Okay.
But otherwise...
Okay. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. I think Thursdays are a good idea too, especially because as we get further into the budget, we meet Thursday anyway. So it's kind of like a time that we generally work out to be here.
So even if we have one meeting on a Tuesday, that's the police, but then we have a meeting on Thursday, there's two buildings for fire, so, we could have the meeting just be between the two. So Danielle, you had something to add?
I was just gonna say, currently, the way they were drafted, we had slotted 45 minutes per facility with a maximum of 3 facilities and 15 minutes in between. That does make for a long meeting that takes you guys from about 6 to 9-ish, depending on if anything runs over. I agree, I think limiting it to 1 or 2 facilities per night would probably be beneficial. And since all of our administrators don't have to go to every tour, they're only going to the tours that their facility is on, that could work for the town side. Obviously, I want to be conscious of the school's time where Scott may have to attend more of those.
I'm not going.
No.
Even if we had a vice principal come in.
Yeah,
or
I mean,
a principal
yeah, more
from
than
that
likely,
school.
it'll be the principal, the assistant principal.
Okay. So, Frank, go ahead.
I agree. I like Thursday a lot. I think it gives us a lot of flexibility. The concept of weekend tours is not really appealing for a number of reasons, and I think Thursday is a lot more flexible.
So I can check on the calendar for how that works. Obviously, certain facilities are booked at certain times. We have to be conscious of, public meetings or whatnot. If we're visiting town hall, the library may have events. So I will work with department heads and I'll let them know we're looking at Tuesdays and Thursdays all in the month of September. Is that correct?
So we already have a meeting scheduled for September 5th at 6 p.m.
Yep.
So you can schedule a tour.
One there. Yep.
And then one for 9/26 at 6 p.m. You can schedule a tour. And then let's maybe do those 2 Thursdays. So
No.
the 7th and the 28th.
Okay,
And see if we can
okay.
cover the town. Like I said, I think the school we should be okay with because Glen Lake is not
Tiny.
that big.
Right.
And the elementary schools are not that big either. So I think those might be longer meetings, but I think that adding 2 Thursdays where we don't have to feel rushed at these facilities and we can take our time with it, I think would be more valuable.
Okay, does that mean you want to cancel or retain the August 29th one that was proposed for town as well?
Oh, I didn't even see that. I'm looking at
It's just because we had 5 weeks in August. Is the committee open to that, or do you want to keep them all into September? Or just
Yeah,
align as much as possible, 1 per night, and then work with the chair to work
Let's
out-
do the tours. Let's scratch the meeting in August and do the September. We'll do those 4 dates in September.
Okay,
And the school side can commit to doing those 2 dates. That would be great.
So
Go ahead,
8/29 is a scratch.
Yes. Okay, so that should take us through October, where we're going to have the joint meetings with the school board. And then November, we're going to have, I'm looking for presentation, town deliberations. Town presentations are after, because that's what the committee decided. Okay. Are there any questions about the calendar? Any comments? Allison?
Can you just summarize again? So what did we decide in September? Are we doing
So we're
a Tuesday and Thursday on each of those 4 weeks?
We're having a meeting on the 5th of September, the 7th of September, and the 26th of September, and the 28th of September.
Okay.
And that will cover all of the town facilities.
but you're still keeping 12 and 19.
We are keeping the
Right,
12th
you're
and
just not
19th for
adding that.
school.
Got it.
Not adding the Thursday on those 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
And that way, I really feel like it took us an hour here, and I don't want to spend 9:30, get out of a meeting. So if we can, I just split it up, I think that'd be better.
That
Okay.
helps with daylight hours too,
Right.
to being able to see facilities.
yeah.
during
Right,
daylight hours.
right. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and just stick to this calendar for the rest of the year. Go from there. So is there any other new business?
I did.
Olivia?
Hi, thank you for letting me speak. I promise I'll be pretty quick. It's been late, but I thought it was really important that I share some information that's happened over the past month in regards to the safety and security of this committee's members as well as people in other town seats and leadership roles. What you guys might not be aware of is that since we last met in June, I've been the recipient of 2 separate threats in town, both of which were reported to and are being investigated by the Goffstown Police Department. On July 15th, while the rest of my family was out of town, I returned home to find a threatening note left on my screen porch at our most commonly used door. This was immediately reported to the police department, and Officer Bjork and later Detective Sergeant LaRoche handled this case. The note was taken as evidence and used profanity as well as terms such as woke and the phrase being watched. This threat was taken seriously by both my family and the police department. More recently, on August 1st, my husband and I returned home from a morning walk and discovered vandalism to our family car. The vandalism was primarily to stickers of organizations that our family as private citizens support. Again, profanity and the word woke were used, this time with permanent marker. This act of vandalism was also immediately reported, and Officer Latondra responded, supporting our family with further surveillance and support. I've chosen to share this information with you guys prior to making a public statement because there's three main reasons. As municipal leaders at Goffstown, we've all taken an oath to serve Goffstown together. And I proudly sit side by side with all of you, valuing your opinions regardless of how we're registered and how we are voted. It's also important to me, and I think to all of you, that we stand together against acts like these. We should not be threatened, and our families should not be made to feel unsafe in our homes for any reason. None of us should be targeted because of our identity, lifestyle, or because we have a seat in a town election. Also, the third and final reason is that our country, state, and community have indeed become more polarized in recent years. And as we head into another election cycle, I think it's important that we remember we're all neighbors, our children learn together, our husbands and wives work together. And we all live and drive on the same streets. We share in leadership roles on these boards and committees, and acts like these are inexcusable. I have no idea who left these notes and who took a permanent marker to my vehicle, but what I do know is that my 6, my 8, my 11-year-olds are all really scared right now. Chief Sereno has been a huge support to them and has met with them as well as other community leaders. And we've spent the majority of our summer increasing security at our home and having safety discussions with our kids rather than enjoying our summer. So basically, I just wanted to share that with all of you because I want to make sure you guys are safe as well. The Goffstown Police Department are all paying really close attention to a lot of the different committee members in towns and any security issues that people are having. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys were all aware. Because I know a lot of times things can get really loud and unpredictable on things like social media, but in real life, things like this are happening. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Olivia, if you could forward that over to the town so they could put that in the minutes, that would be
Yeah.
great.
I will. Thank you.
Melanie?
Olivia, I want to say, first of all, I'm glad that your family is safe and you're getting support.
Thank you.
And second, I'm a little overwhelmed that one of your first thoughts, at least here, was the concern of every committee member, and that's really appreciated. Thank you.
Scott?
I'm heartbroken to hear this. I want to let the public know that I have been parts of budget committees as either an elected person. I represented both the select board, the school board. I've been a part of this group for a really long time. And I can say for the last several years, whether it be Joe as the chair or Melanie as a prior chair, they have done a great job, and there are people who have different opinions on how things should go. But the folks that are around this table, and I've gotten to know some of you pretty well, are good, decent people. And there always will be differences of opinion on how money is spent, et cetera, but the folks here are good people, and I think it's conveyed that way. Great conversation as we did our tour. So for the folks out there, they have differences of opinion on things, but there's no nastiness, there's none of that. So I'm heartbroken, by that, and anything I can do to help, I'm just devastated to hear that. And Joe had shared something recently too about someone whose, political signs were vandalized, et cetera. That has no place in this town. I mean, you can believe and support whoever candidate or position, and there should never be that fear that someone is going to do that. So it's heartbreaking. Sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Frank.
Lydia, I'm sorry that happened, and threats, intimidation, and that is completely unacceptable, period. I don't care what side of an issue somebody's on. breaking the law, intimidating someone is unacceptable. If there's anything you need from me, you got it,
Thank you so much.
to stop that. I mean, I don't know who did it, I don't know what sort of mind thinks that's acceptable, but it's not. At the end of the day, we're all Goffstown residents, and we should behave like it. So, that's it for me.
Well, I think all those comments echo, of course, what I was going to say to the rest of the committee. So if you need anything or need some support, please let us know.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Any other new business? No? Okay, I'm going to kick off the rest of the agenda to Danielle and Scott. Danielle, can you talk about the New Hampshire Municipal Association budget workshop? And then we'll head into an orientation.
Okay, so the New Hampshire Municipal Association has an annual budget and finance workshop. It is open to elected officials as well as staff members. The date that it was selected is September 12th. The location is the Dairyfield Restaurant in Manchester. And the registration is open. Space is limited, but they do have a virtual option that they've added as well. So if you attend in person, they provide lunch as well, because it is an all-day event. If you attend virtually, obviously you're doing your own lunch. They don't send you Uber Eats, but we do pay for registration. So if any of the committee members are interested in going, please email Catherine, and she will make sure to get you registered. Just clarify if you're trying to attend in person or virtually. So when she does the sign up, she'll know how to enroll you.
Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is a Goffstown budget orientation. So this really concludes our official meeting business, but we're going to have orientation for those members that are new. I'm going to stick around for the presentation, but if you've served on a committee and you do not want to attend, this is not part of the official meeting. This is just an orientation part of it. So, all right, kick it off. Go ahead.
Okay.
Should we officially close the meeting?
If,
No.
if
We have
all
to be
members
on
are
camera.
staying, then
Yeah.
it would remain part of the meeting because you have a quorum.
Yeah.
So, Scott, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So if you could just go to this packet here. So Danielle and I are going to tag team a few
We
of these
do.
things, so just so you're aware. But municipal budget, so there are some laws that you should know that exist that really pertain to what your role is. And the biggest one is New Hampshire RSA 32. And that's the one that if you do want to familiarize yourself with what your statutory duties are, that is the one to go to. The next one is the access to government records, 91A. Just sharing that with you because when, we've said this, I think in prior meetings, but when you, please don't reply to all on emails, that's part of the public record, and if you do that, then all those emails that have to go into the public record, so that's why everything kind of goes through Joe or Catherine, Danielle. Even I'm not involved in that. This is more or less a town committee, so everything goes through the chair and Danielle and Catherine in terms of the officialness, so just be mindful not to hit the reply all, and that was really it for that, because everything is subject to the right to know.
And just a reminder, you'll notice every correspondence coming from the town has everybody blind copied, which we announce at the header of the email. And then for all of the RSAs that Scott listed here, even the subsections, those were provided to all committee members for the first meeting. So you have a digital copy in your email, and of course, the full RSA is available on the website as well.
All right. On the next page, very much like the town, the school district operates under what's called fund accounting. And basically, with fund accounting, both the town and the school are given by the voters a certain pool of money, and that's all the money that you can spend for that particular fiscal year. There are some exceptions, don't get me wrong, but for the majority of what we do, we are bound by monies that are in these funds. The first of those funds, and the one that you're going to spend the lion's share going through on the school side, is the general fund. It's the primary fund. It's where the vast majority of all of the monies flow through. And that's the one that you will spend, again, most of your time on. Our food service fund is Fund 21, and it's, for the most part, it's self-sustaining, which means that we don't raise taxes for food service. There was an exception during COVID because we had to subsidize it. But funds are generated to support that. The federal government gives us monies through the free and reduced lunch program. The state gives us some child nutrition monies, but then the rest of it is generated by the prices that we charge students for breakfasts and lunches. Special revenue, your grants fund is Fund 22. Again, the boatload of that is federal grants, and then there are some small state grants, but again, those are not raised by taxation. Food service and your grants fund, your special revenue fund, they're all part of the overall appropriation. So that by law has to be included on any warrant article. So that's why you'll say, hey, why is it that we have hypothetically a budget of $50 million in the general fund, but the budget overall is 55? Well, we have to include all of them. And then lastly, we do use capital project funds. So that's when we are doing a capital project, we will create those. So there was a fund, the turf field, the theater, all those other things. We do separate accounting for those to track those.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
a quick question
Yeah.
about the capital fund. So, say the one for the field specifically, when that project is done, does that fund close, or do you keep it open with something? Because like you said, there will be maintenance, you will need.
No, that fund
will
would
be totally
when the
closed.
project is done, and many times projects are not done until a year after, because we keep what's called retainage. So if
Yep.
there's an issue, most projects have what's called retainage, where in case there's some issue, we hold on to it. After that year, and there's no issues, then we release that retainage,
Okay.
then we close out that project. Okay? And then the last one are trust funds. I serve with Melanie on the trustees of trust funds, and those are capital reserve funds, and we have a good amount of scholarship funds that are held by the trustees, and they're simply on our balance sheet, although we don't really, the school district doesn't really manage them. They're managed by the trustees. On the next page, this committee focuses a lot on the expenditures and the budget itself, but revenues are critically important to both the town and the school. We have different revenue sources, so we have local revenue, and that's mostly, the majority of that is from New Boston tuition. We also charge tuition for what's called role model preschools at the preschool at the Glen Lake School. So 4-year-olds are role models, and they help our kids who have special needs, and parents are charged a much below market rate for that, because we want to entice these students to be there and to help. And lastly, we have parking fees, lost book fees, et cetera. They all are part of local revenue. State revenues, these are dwindling, so it'd be a special education aid, building aid are examples of those. Federal revenues are mostly our grants, and we get numerous grants in terms of, that's called title grants. These are federal entitlement programs. IDEA is more or less from your, for special education. You've heard about ESSER. Yes, sir.
Do you have active grant, do you chase after grants actively?
Yes, very
Do
actively.
you don't have someone designated to do that, though?
You're looking at them. And our Wendy Kohler, who's our assistant superintendent, chases a lot of grants. Steve Bourget, I was mentioning, our IT director, he got like a lot of grants for IT. So each department head is responsible. Principals, no, not really. I did have Kim McCann, she was able to secure like a $10,000 grant for co-curricular or something, so it happens, but it's mostly the SAU administrators do that.
We were having a discussion about that at the select board meeting.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a time-consuming process, but you can get a lot of benefits from that. I think there's a huge benefit. A lot of school districts and towns have grant writers, and more often than not, they generate more in grants than what they pay out to the grant writer, so it's a win-win. We don't have that. We kind of share in those responsibilities at the SAU. I wish we had one.
Thanks.
A New Hampshire adequacy aid, there's been a lot of discussion about that over the last legislative session, and I'm not saying this to suck up to the chair, but.
You can if you want.
Okay. So the last legislative session, Joe is really good at communicating with his constituent group, especially the school. And we thought we were going to have, everything was kind of great. The governor had a budget, the legislators had a good budget, and then went to the Senate, and it ended up being about $700,000 or $800,000 less than the governor and the House's budget. So all those great intentions, great. I appreciate everything that you did, and the rest of our group. But at the end, it was $700,000 less. So, that had about a 40-cent difference on the tax rate for us. And that's for the next 2 years. So, Joe, I just want to say thank you. Appreciate everything that you do. And that was a great effort and just didn't materialize. And I will say this, in defense of the government, the state government, there's huge issues everywhere. There's health and human services. There's needs, economic needs all throughout, and you know that too. So I think at the end there was a compromise, and I said this to the school board and others that I work with, is that I think there was a lot of good compromising that happened. I really do.
I would say out of the 3 budgets
Yep.
I was a part of, this one is the one I'm most proud of
Yeah.
because it was the one that came from the most amount of people supporting it.
Yeah,
So
it was, again,
Yeah.
would have been better for us, but overall for the state, I think it was good. SWEPT is your statewide property tax. These are monies that are raised locally, and they are retained locally, but they're under the guise of state aid. Okay? That sounds a little weird, so Doug, you can talk to me after, I'll explain it. It's kind of like a shell game in a way, but, and then the use of fund balance to reduce taxes. So this is whenever we do budget for revenues, and obviously we budget on our expense side. If we have an over collection of revenues or an underspend of our budget, that goes towards the fund balance, and monies are then used to reduce taxes. Right now, we're going through our audit this week. I had predicted that between the over collection of revenues and the underspend of the budget, probably around $2 million to offset the tax rate. I think we're going to be around that target, so I feel pretty good about that. I'll know by tomorrow or Friday. By Thursday or Friday, if that is, if we hit that target. But that's really important because those revenues then reduce the need that we need to collect local taxes for. So the more revenue that we get, the less that the local taxpayer has to shell out. So we do, I know that the school board, and I'm sure the select board does the same thing. You look for whatever revenues you can get through, whether it be grants or different aid. We pay a lot of attention to making sure that the numbers that we get from the state are accurate, so that we're getting every single penny that's owed to us. So the next page, just I'm not going to go over it a whole lot, and this is very similar for the town and the school, and that's you have a proposed budget and you have your default budget. So just take a look and read through this. This is part of the statute. So you're going to hear about the default budget. So if the budget were not to pass, there is a provision in the statute that allows for the governing body to have what's called a default budget, which is the current budget that you're in. There are additions for any contractual obligations that have been approved by the voters, so a teacher's contract or a Teamster's contract, if that was approved by the voters as part of the default, and anything that's mandated by law, so we have a lot like special education and special education transportation is mandated by law. So in that particular case, increases in special ed transportation are part of the default. Increases in regular ed transportation are not always by the default. So law requires us to provide K through 8 transportation, but not 9 through 12. So it's a little tricky, but you'll see some things that are part of the default and others that aren't. And at the end, I always explain to the school board, here are the things that I calculated as the default, and here's that is part of the proposed. So you'll see that as new spending. And then the school board ultimately, and the select board, they determine what is default and what is not. And that's all publicly disclosed, it's transparent, it's on all of our state forms that we send to the Department of Revenue, so there's nothing, hidden there. But again, this is the default budget, and I want you to be familiar with that. And then we're just going to kind of quickly go over the budget itself. So for the newer members, you're going to see a 14-digit budget line, and essentially they're broken down into subsections. So in the example that I gave you before, where it starts with a 10, the 10 in that above example represents the fund, and you're going to be looking at, when we review budgets, pretty much two funds. The general fund, which is, you'll spend 95% of your time on that, and then you'll look at it should say food service fund, I apologize for the typo, but it's the food service fund. And again, those are self-sustaining funds. The special revenue fund is one that kind of, I estimate it, but I can never spend more, or we can never spend more than what is given to us in grants. So we budget for it, and it's what we think we're going to be getting in grants. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but we never spend more than that number. And then lastly, the capital projects and the trust funds. The next line, on the next page, you'll see that the next three numbers, the 222, that would represent the location of the school. So when we go through the budget, you'll see that 000 is the district location. And as I think Joe mentioned it, a lot of our IT expenses now are in there, transportation is in there. So the district budget is probably, I don't know, $11 million out of the $50 million budget, because it includes a lot of the ones that are spread across all schools, so that, whether that be transportation, IT, things like that. Yep.
As you continue, is there an example on one of these budgets sheets that you've given us that we can kind of look at
Let me see.
that makes,
Probably. No,
oh,
no.
I would refer you to last year's
Like
budget.
last year's
Yeah.
budget, okay.
Yeah, all of that.
that was gonna be my next thing.
We would refer to the codes, but we.
And I'm
can
gonna,
the pages too.
Yeah.
on the back, you'll see a cheat sheet that I give during the whole thing. So Bartlett is 101, Maple Avenue is 102, Glen Lake 103, and then 204 is Mountain View Middle School, 305 is Goffstown High School. These codes are really important. These codes are used universally across the United States. So they follow the same basic premise. So 100s are elementary schools, 200s are middle or junior high schools, and 300s are high schools. And what they try to do is they try to compare apples to apples amongst all school districts in New Hampshire. You can also draw comparisons between different school districts in different states, although it's a little bit harder there. But for the most part, all of our expenses have to get slotted in, because the state wants to know how much money are we spending at the elementary level for, say, regular education or special education, or how much money are we spending at the high school level for like math or something like that. So there's ways for them to calculate that. The next page is the what's called the function code. That's a 4-digit code. In this case, it was 333. So again, what you're going to see in our budgets are the 1100 function code is regular education, 1200 code is special ed. All of our administrative codes are the 2400 series. Our facilities are 2600. Transportation is 2700. So again, you'll be able. What the state likes to do is they like to draw comparisons. Now, in believe it or not, like in the North Country, that 2,700 for transportation, the cost per pupil is much higher in the North Country because these students could be traveling an hour to school due to the fact that it's more sparsely populated, whereas in the southern part of New Hampshire, it's not, they don't spend nearly as much on transportation because the schools, they're closer together. The next code, which is a 2-digit code, represents the program. So again, I know I got quizzed at the last one and I failed it, like what was math, or like I don't really know. I used the cheat sheet just like you do. I think there's some codes that I know 611 is the guideline, but like somebody said, well, what's the English code? And like I failed miserably on the quiz. So it's on there. I have people that work with me that memorize these things, and that's really good for them. Like Laura, she can rattle off the codes, but I can't do that. I have issues, I guess, but I can't remember everything. And then the last code, which is 3 digits. In this case, it's 555. This is the account lines. And this one is important. So your 100 through your 199, these are more or less your salary lines. Your 200 through 299s are your benefits, like health, dental, retirement, FICA, workers' comp, unemployment. 300 through 399 are contracted services. We use a lot of contracted services for special education. Like most school districts, we struggle to find speech pathologists, occupational therapists, behavioral specialists, and we have to hire contractors for this to come into our schools. They tend to be a lot more money, in some cases double what we would potentially be able to do, but again, they're required oftentimes by the individual education plans, the IEPs that students have. So you'll see that mostly in the district line, you'll see the contracted services. Your 400s through 499s are facility related, typically repairs, maintenance, rental. Your 500 through 599 deals with insurance, our costs for data, phone, also tuition, postage. So a tuition line is another big expenditure. We have students who require out-of-district education as far as the Lakes region, south, close to like Methuen and others, with their schools where we send students to. Some of them are related to a court-ordered intervention, so we might have a student who got into legal problems and they know they're not allowed to be here, and the court orders them to be educated elsewhere. In those particular instances, we have to pay for that cost up front, and then we get reimbursed by the state in arrears, but it's usually capped. So we might own the first like $60,000, and if that placement costs $120,000, then we get $60,000 back in the following year. So we have upwards of 1.2 million, I believe, in out-of-district placement costs. Depending upon that out-of-district placement cost, we have, not in this district, but it is not uncommon for a residential placement to be $250,000. So our contingency fund, should a student move in or require that type of thing, that's one of the things that would be used on. But they are super costly. 600 through 699 are supplies, oil, propane, gas, software, information access fees. I think you're going to hear a lot about IT this particular budget cycle. Most of our information access fees, and I assume the town must be doing the same thing. A lot of the software, we can't buy the software on the shelf anymore. Now it's all software as a service. It's all subscription. So even like QuickBooks, all of a sudden goes subscription. They charge an outrageous amount of money for it. So we're seeing that with financial software, you name it, it's all subscription-based, and I don't know what you're seeing, but like it's crazy what they're charging.
Oh, yeah, it's easy to see 20% increases or more.
Yeah.
As an example, we don't use QuickBooks on the town side for our full financials, but we did have one department that was using it for their own internal tracking, and for one user on QuickBooks, it used to be less than $2,000. Now it's, I think at last I heard it was over $10,000 for a single user. So we're
Yeah,
dropping
so,
that program.
Yeah, we had to switch because we use QuickBooks for our student accounts here at the high school. And we have about $120,000 for different clubs, you name it. That's how we have to keep track of all of it. And it went nutty on
Yeah.
QuickBooks, so we had to hire, and we got another vendor in, and I think it was like $5,000 or $6,000, but it's nuts. 700 through 799 is your furniture, equipment, and then 800 to 999 miscellaneous expenses. We don't have any bonds right now, but if they were, if we did, those principal and interest charges would be there. And then lastly, the last couple of pages is that cheat sheet. So for Doug and Olivia, I don't know, Jim, are you going to be doing budget committee, or you just got
No,
short straw
Peter's
tonight?
Just taking over for my buddy Pete today.
Okay, so Peter, I think, is kind of familiar, and Laura, you were old school at this, you did last year. So this is just the codes for you. this is generic, I use this for both New Boston and Goffstown, so you'll see like codes for New Boston on here, but it kind of gives you a little bit of a cheat sheet, so if you want to know, like, you know, if you want to look at each line, and I can always show you after a meeting, like, what that is, so that's it for me.
So the second half, you have a second handout, kind of a teal color.
You didn't get one?
So some of the orientation stuff, Scott and I kind of pair up on these items, but you didn't give. Oh,
And I didn't
give one
take-
to yourself.
No, I didn't give it. Doug, you got one, right?
No.
Does everybody have one?
I just didn't do this, oh, see, like.
Now we do get it. Thank you.
May I ask a quick question? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Just, has the town ever thought about like combining the IT strategies between the town side and the school side?
I will say yes and no. No, in the sense that they are separate. Yes, in the sense that they talk all the time. So, and they share their intellectual, their intellect and their strategies together. I know Brian and Steve, I mean, I've been with them as they're, you know, when they collaborate on things. There are certain things that we have to keep separate. So there are different laws that require school data to be segregated, and they can't be commingled. So, but we have talked about virtualization, and there's certain things that I know that we do partner with. So GTV is a great example of that. So the school is very happy to be partnered with Goffstown Television, Parks and Rec too, but Goffstown TV. So that press box is a great example. The town bought one camera, we bought all the back end stuff, and now they're both working together to connect it to each other's respective networks so that they can do that. But in terms of having one IT department for both town and school, we can't do that. If we had a different type of government, in terms of having like a city-type charter, there's a possibility of that. But right now, because we're two legal entities and the way that a lot of these laws are structured, we have to be separate, unfortunately.
So to start off with some of the basics, gross appropriation, as you see on slide 2. So RSA 32.5, as we talked about, that's the main RSA, but it requires that all appropriations be stated on a gross basis. So that's really important, that when you see our budgets, they're going to come forward to you for the full amount of the cost of the item, and if there's offsetting revenue, that's going to have to be shown on a revenue completely separate. The note to add here is that revenues are set by the select board or the school board. They are not something that this committee can alter. The expenditures, however, are the responsibility of this committee. So the two work very closely together, and we always bring forward our revenues. You see our revenue reports with all of our budget reports, and then when we come to do our budget presentations, we always speak to the revenues because they very much impact what that net cost truly is expected to be. So all revenues must be accounted for as their offsetting counterpart. An example that we see a lot of time with something simple is like equipment or vehicles. If the vehicle costs $100,000 and we're able to sell one for $70,000, we can't show 30 in the budget. We have to budget $100,000 and then list that trade elsewhere as
Yeah,
revenue.
if I could jump in, so I look at social media, probably shouldn't, but I do, and so somebody made a comment like, oh, the X budget went up, $4 million, right? Okay, but it was the grants budget, because in the school side, we ended up getting all this money from ESSER. The bottom line is that, yes, because of a gross appropriation, we had to budget, let's say, $3 million more, or $2 million more than we got the prior year, but there was also a $2 or $3 million corresponding revenue.
Right.
So that's what you're referring to, is a lot of times, you can't just budget the net, you have to budget the gross part of it, and, no pun intended, and because of that, people sometimes freak out, like, oh my God, we went from 50 million to $54 million, but the impact in terms of what we have to collect in local taxes was not 4 million, it was like,
Yeah.
say, 1.5 million.
So you're going to hear a lot of times that we refer to the tax effort. A lot of times, social media gets really nervous about the tax rate. The tax rate setting happens in October, so I think I have a slide in here later that mentions that. That's something the select board sets, and in accordance with the DRA. And when that process happens, it's all in public meetings. Everyone's welcome to attend, be part of that process. But when we're talking about budget, we really are looking at the tax effort. So in the past, if we had to collect a certain amount of money, 50 million, and now we're collecting 50 million, it's still the same tax effort, even if the budget number is bigger because of offsetting revenues. The next slide I have for you is no spending without appropriation. So something that's really super key for this committee to keep in mind, we can't spend without an appropriation. So that doesn't mean an individual budget line. There used to be kind of an old school strain of thought, and we still use it in some respects for our own peace of mind and keeping track of things logistically. But we used to have a lot of accounts that had like a single dollar in them because people used to fear that you couldn't spend out of a budget line if you didn't have any money in it. The DRA has clarified that they're talking about the DRA category and not the individual line item. So if the DRA category is police, and maybe the furniture line in police is $0 because we weren't planning on buying furniture, but then somebody needed a chair, we don't have to come to this committee and do a big budget transfer. As long as we stay within the appropriation for police, we are able to make that purchase. The select board, within their powers, and the same with the school board, can move monies operationally from one line to another as needed, and they can allow over expenditures and under expenditures as long as their bottom line nets to whatever the appropriation was set by the voters and this committee.
And if I may, this is very common on the school, like I mentioned before. If we can't hire a speech path and all these, I budgeted for them as a salary, but then I have to do budget transfers to contracted services because we couldn't hire. So we always try to hire, and then sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. But it's not uncommon in like October, November for me to be doing like $200,000 to $300,000, $400,000 of salary budget transfers because of that. So I just wanted you to, you'll see that when you go through the budget. It's like, hey, you only budgeted $400,000, but you spent $700,000, and that's because of that.
Yeah, and on the town side, our last few years, you'll notice in the budget reports, we've gotten away a little bit from doing all the individual line item transfers because it just makes for a logistical and administrative nightmare. Unless it's something big, if we're doing a specific project or a specific purchase that could warrant some kind of transfer, we'll go ahead and do that. But if we're talking like $200 over on this line, $100 over this line, it's not worth going through all of the process to have a full vote, a motion, come back with all the documentation, document it for the auditors, do the journal entries when the net is still within the guidelines. So that has to do with operations and less with the actual budget appropriation. There are a few exceptions that you see noted here. So legal judgments, that would be, of course, anything court ordered. DRA permission, that's very, very rare. You have to go through a whole process for that. Contracts or mandates, unanticipated revenues. So the town, and actually Scott mentioned this during the tour, the town adopted for both the school and the town to allow us to use RSA 3195, which allows us to have public hearings when new money becomes available during the year. So that could be a grant, it could be a donation. When those monies come up, the respective governing body holds a public hearing. If it's over $10,000, there's a hearing. If it's under $10,000, it has to be placed on the agenda, but doesn't require a separate hearing. And then they basically get input, and then they vote to accept and expend those monies for the stated purpose. So that's one where you wouldn't see a line item in the budget because we didn't know it was coming. It was unanticipated. Capital reserve funds and trusts. We do have capital reserve funds, and we plan for pretty much every project that is tied to a capital reserve fund appears on the budget through the CIP. However, there could be something like maybe the fire apparatus fund. You know, we plan to buy an engine, but maybe something happened and a smaller apparatus or a vehicle or something failed to pass inspection, it can't be used anymore, and it's a critical infrastructure piece, then the select board could make a motion to utilize capital reserve funds to replace that piece of apparatus. It's pretty rare that that occurs, because we do have our planned timelines for moving items in and out so that they stay serviceable the whole time.
Danielle, I just wanted to also just touch on, as it came up the last couple of years, and that, the no means no
Yes.
type of thing. If you want to explain it, want me to do it, or?
Yeah, well, no means no is really in reference to separate warrant articles.
Right.
So if you have a topic that comes before the voters that says, hey, can we put $50,000 into a CRF for the school fields? If they say no, then that cannot occur. It can't, if somebody comes forward with a grant or a donation, it still can't land in that fund. It could be accepted as unanticipated revenue, used a different way.
The bigger one comes from you guys. So
Yes.
let's say, for an example, you see a particular line, and let's just say, it doesn't really matter, it's a roof for the police station or a school, all right? And you say, hey, it's in your budget, I think you should put that as a special warrant article. You're gonna get pushback from the town and the school rep, because no means no. If it goes before the voters on that warrant article, and they say, no, we voted no on that roof, well then,
You
in
can't
the
spend
example,
any.
you can't spend money to replace the police or that school roof, which means you can tarp it.
Even if you get a grant.
Even if you get, right, you can tarp it, but you can't,
Fix it.
fix it. So there are certain things where, whether it be Jim or Peter or Jared on the school side, where they're like, whoa, like, we can't put this boiler, we have to replace this boiler. If you say that, we put this on the warrant article and it fails, then we can't replace the boiler. And
Right.
this has happened in other municipalities and schools, and it is ugly.
Yeah.
And sometimes it would require a special election. It's bad.
Yeah.
So,
Can you, when that happens, can you call a special meeting?
Yeah.
And raise the funds?
yes, so that's the only alternative, is to do that, and depending upon how your warrant article was worded,
You may
it's
not
getting-
have the ability
You may
to
not
do
have the
that.
ability to do that.
With RSA.
So it's tricky, and it's a situation where I don't think anybody wants to be in,
Also,
honestly.
when a special election is called, that expenditure has to hit the town. So the school doesn't pay for the election
Right.
itself. That's all in our budget. So if a special election is held because a school warrant article failed, that becomes $25,000 that the town has to magically come up with. So, and then you have to try and convince enough voters to get out on another election that wasn't planned. So special elections can really be a
Okay.
huge hurdle for communities. On the next slide, I'm addressing how to read the town budget reports. So, similar to the school, information is separated by department, subcategorized by division and by object. Our full account string is similar to Scott's in that it's 16 digits, I believe. When we show you ours, it's gonna have an 8-digit to identify what department and segment it is, and it's gonna have an object, which is 5 digits to tell you exactly what it is. Is it furniture, office supplies, etc.? So the town departments, there are 6 of them, so you're gonna see those codes 11, 22, 33, 44, 55, and 66 throughout your budget reporting process. Insurance, CIP, special articles, and debt service are all separate departments. So as you see on even the budget reports you have in front of you today, those lines are broken out. The division, first the department, and then the division. So an original appropriation on the town budget report, so this is referring more to these ones you see on a monthly basis. So you have a column here that's gonna have your original appropriation, that means what it was at its adoption. Revised budget, that's gonna be any carry forward encumbrances, as well as any transfers in or transfers out. And then the encumbrances line, which you'll actually see on your reports as a column, that tells you what's open, purchase orders open from the current year against those lines. And then the available budget is truly what's left remaining in that expenditure line for things that we haven't accounted for yet.
And ours is very similar to that in terms of encumbrances. So we will encumber when you read these reports, like early in the year, we're going to encumber funds for all of our teachers' salaries and benefits, because we know what those are. They're mandated, but they sign a contract, so like, we have to pay those out. And then there's other things that are not mandated, and we don't, unless there's a contract or some sort of a legal instrument, we won't encumber those funds, at the beginning of the school year. But I'd venture to say that, I don't know, 75 to 80% of our budget is encumbered in the first, couple of months of the fiscal year, because it's mostly, in our end, it's mostly salary and benefits.
Yeah, and we don't do blanket POs for the most part on the town side, so our salary lines show up as a salary line, so you're gonna see how much was appropriated, how much has been sent, what's left over, and so for the most part, our budget reports show a percentage on the right-hand side, and you can kind of use that as a guide, where if you take a single line, its total appropriation, divided by 12, that's 1/12 of the year, 1 month of the year. And when you get, halfway through the year, you should see about 50% is what we're looking for on expenditures. That's not always true for every line, because we do have certain things that occur, the payment comes out for this particular thing only once a year, or it happens in the fourth quarter of the year, things like that. So that will vary, but things like salary lines and benefits, they'll pace with the year as we go along. The budget on the ballot, so the next slide we have here. So there are really strict rules that govern how we can craft the language for our warrant articles. The budget articles must include the gross expenditures, not the offsetting revenue, as we discussed. The total appropriate operating budget must include both sewer and EMS on the town side. So similar to how Scott said he has the general funds, the food service, and what was the third one that you always have to include?
Special revenue.
You have 3 that you have to show on your
Right.
warrant article.
Yeah.
We do as well on the town side. So ours are the general fund, the EMS fund, and the sewer fund. So those 3 have to be rolled up together on the warrant article. You will see all of those budgets come to you for the budget process. But it's something that we always like to call out. Nowhere in the state law are we allowed to mention the offsetting revenue in the warrant article that goes on the actual ballot. Which I know some people have discussed trying to argue against that at the state level to get some changes to the law. Because when a voter gets to the ballot and they see that number, this is an example of what you saw in March of 2022, $26,949,893. That is a very large number. But nowhere are we allowed to say that there's, 13 million in expected revenue or things of that nature, which can offset it. I really wish we could. So we do put that information out there. We put it out there through the budget process, through all of these budget hearings, the public hearing that this committee holds, the deliberative session, we talk about it. And then, of course, when we do the voter's guide, which has to be fact-based only, we always try to call out those offsetting revenues so people have an idea of how much is actually truly being asked for when a budget number goes forward to the ballot. So saying on that same wavelength of the ballot and how the budget's going to appear, the EMS fund, the way it is currently set up, it's a special revenue fund, which means the town had voted to establish that fund. Monies that are spent from that fund have to be appropriated by the voters each year, but the revenue automatically goes into that fund. So when somebody is transported by ambulance, their insurance makes payment or the individual makes payment, that money automatically goes into a completely separate fund. It does not commingle with any of the general fund, but we cannot use that money on anything other than EMS service. The issue is when we go forward to the ballot, we have to ask the voters, can we use the money from the fund to pay for the cost of that fund? Luckily, the voters have said yes, and we always try to highlight passing this article will reduce how much taxes are collected. But again, on the no means no, if we had a year where the voters said no, then we would have to raise taxes to pay for all the ambulance services. Meanwhile, all the money collected from previous years of ambulance services would be locked up and no one could spend a penny of it. So the no means no on this article is absolutely critical for us.
So is that until the next election?
Until the next election, when we can ask the voters again.
Okay.
Yeah, we are looking at alternatives because this was established way back when there were very limited types of accounts that could be utilized. The DRA and the state have since made additional accounts, so now they have revolving accounts. We would like to look at moving to a revolving account. What's great about that is you don't have to ask permission to do the appropriation, and the money that is spent on EMS doesn't have to go before the voters separately. It just automatically self-feeds itself because it's already restricted for its purpose. The state limits which types of purposes can be used. So you can't make a revolving fund for just anything. It specifies ambulance service, you can do one for recreation, you can do one for, I believe, trash pickup. So there are maybe 4 or 5 that can be created. They do have to go to the voters first to be created. The voters then have their yes or no. The problem with converting one, and part of what we're trying to navigate now, is if we were to create one, we'd have to ask for permission to create one, but we'd still have to operate in the current year. So you kind of almost have an overlap, even if you're saying, can we create one and fund it with $1, or revenues from here on out will go into it. And then the following year, we'd have to go back and say, can we close the old one and put the money into the new one? Because if you had it, you can't do it all at once, because if they say yes to one and no to the other, all of a sudden you can end up in a situation where you don't have any funds from either.
I have to leave because they're testing the lights out
Yeah.
back. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, just give me a call at the office, all right?
Don't forget, I'm gonna blame you for unassigned fund balance.
You can blame me.
He knows that.
Well, from like 5 years ago?
No.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Scott. So, for an example, 2023, so you saw budget appropriations of $26.9 million. Then you subtract, we had 6.7 in anticipated general fund offsetting revenue, another 1.7 million in sewer enterprise fund offsetting revenue, and then another $500,000 in EMS special revenue fund. So altogether, even though basically $27 million was the number on the ballot, it only came out to 17.9 million when you're actually looking at tax effort. So that's a big difference, and I really wish we could put that on the ballot. So unassigned fund balance, I mean, Scott and I joke about it because it's its own beast. It's really unique. It exists only in municipalities. It doesn't exist in the private sector or anything like that. And the unassigned fund balance for the school and for the town are completely different from one another. They have different rules about what can be retained, how it can be used, how it can be accessed, what it is there for. So the unassigned fund balance, or UFB as we call it for short, it's created similar to how the school gets theirs. So when we spend less than was appropriated and or we receive more revenue than was anticipated, those two things come together to create the unassigned fund balance. The fund balance is a balance sheet account. However, it only represents the differences between assets and liabilities at a specific point in time. So what's really key is, you've probably heard this at all deliberative sessions I've gone to, this does not represent cash in the bank. So UFB is critical for cash flow management, but it is not actually cash in the bank. So assets are also considered as part of the available fund balance. Some of the assets that are part of the fund balance are uncollected taxes, as well as short-term receivables that are due to the town. So just as an example, when we set tax rate, the DRA always uses the unassigned fund balance from the prior close of year. So in Scott's case, it kind of lines up nicely because his end of year is 6/30. We go into tax rate setting in the fall. That's a very fresh number. For the town, we go into tax rate setting in the fall, and our unassigned fund balance is from December the prior year. So it's a big gap of time. But as an example, at the close of 2022, we had $1.5 million that were uncollected in just taxes alone. And that is our standard from, I mean, ever since I've been here. I know in 2016 forward, it's always been about $1.5 million short on the tax rolls every single year. So that doesn't necessarily seem like a lot, but it really is. And that can impact when you look at a number and says, you know, someone might say, oh, you have $9 million in unassigned fund balance. Well, okay, 9 million, take out the 1.5 that doesn't even exist. Now you have 7, and you start looking at what that actually means, and that number quickly dwindles. So, why do we have unassigned fund balance, and why is it so important? So the towns are responsible for collecting taxes on behalf of the state, the county, and the school. So as a municipal entity, I have to collect taxes for all 4 entities. None of them have to have anybody coming in and saying, you raised my taxes. They come to us, and our tax collector gets to hear it from every single resident. So that can be really tricky, and it's something that when it comes to operations, we have to transfer those monies to those other entities. They have zero liability. If the school's budget passed for $50 million, the school gets $50 million, no questions asked. If the town only collects $48 million, the town has to go out and take out loans to pay the school. We have no opportunity to say, hey, this is how short it is, let's split it up, you're short by this much, you're short by that. All the liability lands on the town. So it's really critical for us where our budget is less than half the size of the school's budget. They're just bigger than us. They have more facilities, they have more staff, and some of their costs are very large. So on a regular month-to-month basis, I will transfer 12 months out of the year, it's not any lower in the summer, $3 to $4 million every single month to the school. And if the school had a project coming up and they said, hey, our construction project's happening in the summer when school's closed, and instead of $4 million, I need $8 million, I don't get to question it, I have to just give them the money. So having that unassigned fund balance is what helps us manage to make sure we can still keep the lights on, pay salary, give the other entities the funds that they're due. The county is due in December, so luckily that one lines up with tax collection happening at the beginning of December, and we pay them in mid-December. So luckily I'm able to get some revenues there and make that $12 million or so payment. But the other items, you know, the school and cash flow really depend on unassigned fund balance and being able to hold us from one tax collection to the other, because we only collect twice a year. So if we collect taxes in December, it has to last us all the way until the following July, but not just all of our expenses, all of their expenses. So that's something that, you know, the tax anticipation notes, we really, really try to avoid. Tax anticipation note is the one type of debt that does not go to the voters. So if the town was short and needed the money, we would be going out to lenders and asking for a tax anticipation note. The taxpayers then have to pick up the burden of paying that interest, and they have no say in the matter because state law says we have no say in whether or not we're going to pay that tax. So we do our best to manage all of that. We work very, very closely with the school. Scott says it all the time, and we do as well. We talk all the time. We are constantly working with each other. He'll send me his cash flow projection, and I'll let him know, hey, this particular month is a little shy because we haven't collected revenue from this grant or that source. So rather than asking for $4 million in this month, can I only do 3, and maybe we can do an extra $500,000 the next month and catch up. So we work really closely together to try to manage that, which I appreciate because that's not the case in other towns. So we have a great relationship, but that is something about, you know, unassigned fund balance is absolutely critical for us in how we operate. So the next slide here, I have it marked as number 11. So how can it be used? So tax rate setting we can use a little bit of the unassigned fund balance in order to lower the town's portion of the tax rate. So when you look at your tax rate, it's broken up into 4 entities. So you'll see town, school, state, and county. The select board cannot alter any of those 3 other amounts. They're told, hey, you're going to be paying this much for state. This much of your tax rate is for your county. This much is for the school. And the town can look at their portion, which may only be, you know, $8 to $10 on a $30 rate, and that's the only one that they can actually impact. So that can be really tricky. The select board did create a new unassigned fund balance policy last year that they adopted, which sets their target at 12%. So I'll get into that a little bit in the next slide. So tax rate setting, if an emergency occurs, you can use unassigned fund balance. The difference is The school can use it just by the school board making a vote, and they can use those funds. The town does not have access to their unassigned fund balance for emergencies. In order to access those funds for emergencies, we have to go through a whole process that includes this committee. We'd come to you first, we'd go through everything. We would then have to file with Department of Revenue Administration, where we would have to ask permission. They would have to give their opinion on it, and then it actually has to go to the courts, and the courts have to make a judgment on it. And if they say yes, then you can use the money. So having that process occur is extremely rare. The only time I've really even seen it in municipalities has been like, you know, when there's like a total loss, perhaps a building fire or something like that, and it's just too big or beyond when the insurance revenues are expected in, you know, you might need to kind of front the money. That's the only time I've seen it. We've luckily never needed to do that here in Goffstown. And then thirdly, the town can choose to use funds for purchases for not the operational cost, but for unique one-time projects or one-time purchases. In order to do that, they have to get voter approval at town meetings, so those would be separate warrant articles where they would propose to use unassigned fund balance for that particular purpose. So it's really hard for us to use our unassigned fund balance. It exists, but it's really only there to support those other entities. We don't get to use it. So sometimes people try and compare it to the state, because the state has an unassigned fund balance that they refer to as a surplus. That's completely different. The state legislature has the ability to assign those funds and use them as they see fit. The town does not. So it's a completely different thing for us. So what's an adequate level? So the DRA has always had this long range where they say, you know, 8 to 17%. The DRA actually in New Hampshire lists it out as 5% being the minimum, 17 being the maximum. The Government Finance Officers Association, so that's the national board that regulates all of our accounting practices, they recommend that you use the general fund operating expenditures and that you have no less than 2 months of those. Now, we say general fund, Scott and I, in reference to our operating. That's not what this means. In New Hampshire, and the DRA is the one that tracks this, the general fund operating expenditures are calculated by adding the town's general fund, all operating appropriations, the state education, the local education net tax commitment, as well as the county appropriation. So in 2022, just to give you an idea, that number set by DRA was $55.8 million. So 2 months worth would be approximately $9.3 million as the minimum recommendation. And we only retained 7.2 last year because the select board did choose to use $750,000 at tax rate setting to help keep that tax rate in line where they felt it was reasonable. So they now have a target of 16%. So they are trying to get closer to the 2 months worth. 2 months worth would equal 16.67% mathematically. So they are trying to get to a target, but it's going to take time to build that up. So that's something I wanted to call to this group's attention, because a lot of times during the budget process, this group is going to hear from voters, well, why don't they just use the fund balance to build whatever, or, you know, fix this or do that. It's not that simple, and that exists for a reason, and we can't just touch it because we have a project. That is a reason we could use it, but we really shouldn't let it get too low either, because we do need to turn those funds over to those other entities. So you'll see that at the tax rate setting, the fund balance retention little image you have there is actually from the 2022 tax rate setting that was done last fall. So you can see it, kind of a real life snapshot of what that is. My second to last slide here is just the tax effort history. So as you can see, over the last 11 or so years, there's been a trend in how the budgets work. So the orange at the bottom is the county, the yellow is the state, the blue is the town, and then the green is the school. So This is just the facts, and Scott and I have talked about it based on size and everything else that's happened over the last 11 years. The school budget has gone from 14 million to 25 million. Meanwhile, the town's budget has gone from 12 million to 16. So we've been very, very conservative, trying to make sure on all sides that we're keeping our budget as low as possible to maintain operations. Obviously, we have no control over the state or the county. Those numbers come in as they are. You're going to see a big difference in, and this is part of why I kept the additional years on the history, is the state education was always just over 3.2, 3.4, and then in 2022 it dropped down to 2.4. And while it sounds great, that money had to be made up for on the state local education. So that's part of why the budget went from 23 million at the school to 25 million, because it's literally just downshifting it to the town. So those tax efforts, that's really, of the money we have to collect, that's how it breaks down. And those numbers were all taken off the state forms from their compiled forms. So the last item I have for you is just the reminder about that budget and finance workshop. It's a great opportunity for committee members to hear from the state. The New Hampshire Municipal Association puts it on. DRA attends and presents as well. And so it's great to hear about the budget process, what can or can't be done, what we're allowed to do. All of those types of information will be covered. Catherine's contact information is right there on that bottom slide, so you can get in touch with her if you do want to attend, or that's the same contact information if you have any questions or anything at any time throughout the budget process that you need to relay to us. Are there any general questions or specific questions or anything at this point? I know it's a lot of information when we cover this.
So, just a comment, we stopped recording. So can you just make a note that we're adjourning now?
Yep.
Because we still have a quorum, that's all I wanted.
Yes.
I just want to report.
Can I have a motion on who's going to adjourn in a second? I
Yeah,
know
do we
don't
have a motion on
technically need one, but
adjourning?
we have.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Melanie, second by
I'll second.
Laura. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Perfect.
Okay.